The wind came down off the mesas like a warning, thin and sharp, carrying dust that stung the eyes and crept into every crack of the ranch. It rattled the cottonwoods along the dry wash and set the fence wire humming, a sound Eli Mercer felt in his bones before he heard it. He stood at the corral rail with one boot hooked on the lower plank, hat tipped low, watching the last of the light drain out of the sky. His right hand was pressed to his side, fingers digging in as if he could hold the pain still by force alone. "No, don't," he muttered to no one in particular, teeth clenched as a spike of heat flared under his ribs. "That spot hurts." He hadn't meant to say it out loud. The words slipped free on a breath that went wrong. The horse had gone down hard earlier that afternoon, spooked by a rattler that buzzed from the rocks like a live wire. Eli had rolled, come up cursing, waved off the hands who rushed over. He'd remounted because that's what you did. But the ache had followed him back to the barn, a mean, insistent thing that got worse the longer the day went on. The barn door creaked behind him, a familiar sound made unfamiliar by the way it slowed, careful, as if whoever pushed it open was measuring the moment. Footsteps crossed the packed earth. Eli straightened instinctively, jaw setting, pride rising to meet the pain like a shield. Mara Quinn set a lantern on the rail, the glass chiming softly. She didn't say his name. She didn't need to. She took in the way he leaned, the hand pressed flat against his side, the way his breath hitched when he shifted his weight. "You're bleeding through," she said, voice level. Eli snorted. "I've had worse." She stepped closer anyway. The lantern threw light up under her chin, caught the dust on her sleeves. She'd rolled them to the elbow like always, forearms marked with old scars that spoke of fences and knives and a life that hadn't been gentle. She reached for the hem of his shirt. "No," Eli said, sharper now. "Don't. I told you, that spot hurts." "I heard you," Mara replied, fingers already finding cloth. "And I'm doing it anyway." He swore under his breath as she lifted the shirt. Cool air touched skin that burned, and he sucked in a breath that cut short. The bruise was ugly, blooming dark along his ribs, the skin broken where he'd scraped against a rock. Dried blood streaked down toward his belt. Mara's mouth tightened, not in fear but in focus. She set the lantern down again, fetched a canteen, poured water over a rag. "Hold still," she said. "I am holding still," Eli snapped, even as his muscles went rigid. The pain flared bright and white when her fingers pressed, searching. He felt each touch like a map being drawn of his weakness. She was gentle without being timid, her hands sure. She pressed here, there, followed the curve of bone. Eli hissed, teeth bared, breath coming fast. His mind leapt ahead to worst possibilities, cracked rib, internal bleeding, days laid up when the herd needed him. Anger flared alongside fear. "Damn it," he said, "you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she cut in, not looking up. "Because if you won't look after yourself, someone has to." He laughed once, sharp. "Since when did that become your job?" Mara paused. For a heartbeat, the barn was only the sound of the wind and the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night. She met his eyes, and something flickered there, memory, maybe, or a door closing. "Since I saw you come back from that fall," she said. White as a sheet and pretending you weren't. Eli looked away. Pride had always been his armor. His father had worn it until it killed him, a heart that gave out on a cold morning when there was no one else around to notice until it was too late. Eli swallowed, the thought sour. "Just clean it," he muttered. She did. The water stung like fire, and he couldn't help the grunt that tore free. His hand clenched on the rail, knuckles white. Mara's fingers moved with practiced ease, dabbing, cleaning, binding. She tore a strip of cloth, wrapped it snug but not tight, fingers lingering just long enough to test his reaction. "That hurt?" she asked, quieter. "Yes," he said, "everything hurts." She almost smiled at that, a brief curve of her mouth that was gone as quickly as it came. "You'll live." Outside, thunder rolled, low and far, like something big turning over in its sleep. The first drops of rain pattered against the tin roof, hesitant, then more sure. The smell of wet earth rose, rich and clean. Eli let his breath out slowly. The pain settled to a throb, still there but dulled. He glanced at Mara, really looked at her. 2 weeks ago she'd come down the road with a wagon missing a wheel, a mule with more stubbornness than sense, and eyes that didn't flinch when he asked questions she didn't want to answer. He'd offered work because there was work to be done. She'd taken it without gratitude or apology. Why do you care? He asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Mara finished tying the knot, fingers deft. She sat back on her heels, wiped her hands on her pants. The rain picked up, drumming steady now, the sound filling the spaces between them. Because I know what happens when no one does, she said. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Lightning flashed, close enough to turn the barn white for an instant. The lantern guttered, flame wavering. Eli reached out on instinct and steadied it. His hand brushed Mara's, warm and solid. The contact sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with his ribs. Neither of them moved right away. The rain hammered down, loud enough to make conversation impossible for a moment. When Mara pulled her hand back, she did it slowly, as if marking the choice. You should sit, she said, nodding to a bale of hay. Eli eased down, careful. The barn felt smaller with the storm wrapped tight around it, a pocket of light and sound in the dark. He watched Mara move, efficient, unhurried, as she put things away. He thought about the way she'd blocked him without fear, the way she'd pressed on despite his protests. You always like that? He asked. She glanced over her shoulder. Like what? Doing things anyway, she considered, then shrugged. Only when it matters. Thunder boomed again, closer this time. The mule brayed, offended. Eli smiled despite himself. The pain in his side pulsed, a reminder, but there was something else there now too, a sense of being seen, of not carrying the whole weight alone. Don't tell the hands, he said. They'll think I'm soft. Mara snorted. They already know you're stubborn. This won't change much. He laughed, the sound easing something tight in his chest. Outside, the rain softened, steady and sure. Inside the barn, the lantern burned true, and for the first time since the fall, Eli let himself rest, just for a minute, while the storm passed. Weeks passed the way they always did on the high plains, slow when you counted the hours, fast when you looked back. The bruise on Eli Mercer's side faded from angry purple to sickly yellow and then to nothing at all, but the memory of it stayed, a ghost ache that reminded him to move a little smarter. He still rode every day. He still worked until the sun slid down behind the mesas and the sky turned the color of old copper. But now, more often than not, Mara Quinn worked beside him. They didn't talk much about that first night in the barn. They didn't need to. Things simply shifted, like fence posts reset after a storm. Mara took on more responsibility without asking for it, mending breaks, riding the outer edges of the range, keeping quiet watch over the herd. Eli found himself checking where she was before he made decisions, listening when she spoke instead of brushing past her words. It wasn't surrender. It was adjustment. One cold morning, frost still silvering the grass, Eli swung down from his horse and felt the old spot twinge when his boot hit the ground wrong. He froze for half a second, breath tight, then straightened. Mara noticed anyway. Careful, she said. I am, he replied. She raised an eyebrow. That's what you said last time. He grunted, but there was no heat in it. The truth was, he trusted her eyes. Trusted her judgment. That surprised him more than anything. Winter crept closer. Nights stretched long, and the wind carried a bite that cut through wool and leather alike. The cattle grew restless, sensing the change. Eli felt it too, a pressure building in the air and in his chest, the sense that something was coming whether he was ready or not. It came one night in the form of a storm that rolled in fast and mean, lightning tearing open the sky like a blade. The calves spooked, broke from the pasture in a panicked wave. By the time Eli heard the shouting and thunder together, he was already moving. Mara, he called, grabbing his slicker and heading for the tack. I'm here, she answered, already mounted, rain plastering her hair to her face. They rode hard, rain stinging like shot, thunder cracking so close it shook the ground. The herd scattered toward the ravine, hooves churning mud, fear driving them faster than sense. Eli leaned low over his horse's neck, shouting, waving his hat, trying to turn them. A steer bolted straight for the drop, eyes wild. Eli pushed his horse, leaned out to cut it off, and felt it. The old pain flared, sharp and sudden, stealing his breath. His grip slipped for a heartbeat, the world tilting. No, he started, more to himself than anyone else. Mara was already there. She crossed his line without hesitation, rode straight at the steer, shouting, slapping her reins against its flank. The animal veered at the last second, skidded in the mud, then turned back toward the herd. Disaster missed by inches. They worked until their voices were raw and their arms shook, until the cattle were penned and the storm finally began to move on, rain easing to a steady fall. Eli slid from his saddle, boots sinking deep into the mud. He leaned forward, hands on his knees, breath coming hard. Mara dismounted beside him. For a moment, they just stood there in the rain, steam rising from the horses. "You okay?" she asked. Eli straightened slowly. The pain was there, but it wasn't winning. He let out a breath that turned into a laugh, rough and surprised. "Yeah," he said, "thanks to you." She studied him, searching for the lie. Finding none, she nodded. "Good." He shook his head, rain dripping from his hat brim. "You did it anyway," he said. Just like before. Mara's mouth curved, just a little. Someone had to. The ranch felt different after that night. Not safer, exactly, ranches never were, but steadier. Winter came early, snow dusting the mesas and settling thick along the fence lines. Eli found himself planning for two without ever saying it aloud. Extra blankets laid out, another plate set by the fire. When Mara stayed late in the house instead of heading back to the bunk, it felt natural, like a habit they'd always had. They talked more in the evenings, the fire snapping low, shadows long on the walls. Mara told him pieces of her past, not all at once. A hard childhood, a marriage that hadn't been kind, loss that still sat heavy in her chest. Eli listened, offered no easy answers, only the space to speak. When it was his turn, he told her about his father, about the weight of keeping the ranch alive alone, about the fear of failing something that had been in his family longer than he'd been alive. One night, the wind howled so loud it sounded like voices outside the walls. Eli stared into the fire for a long time before speaking. "You don't have to stay," he said finally. "Winter's hard. Work's harder." Mara didn't answer right away. She watched the flames, then looked at him. "I know." Silence stretched between them, thick but not uncomfortable. Eli swallowed. "I want you to," he said. The words were plain, unpolished. "Not because I need help. Because I want you here." Mara's expression softened, something guarded easing open. "I already am," she said quietly. Spring came like a promise kept. Snow melted, grass pushed green through brown earth, calves were born strong and loud. On a clear morning under a wide blue sky, they stood together near the old cottonwood. There was no crowd, no preacher from town. Just a neighbor as witness, a few simple words spoken steady and sure. Mara wore a dress she'd stitched herself, hands as steady as ever. Eli wore his father's hat. When they said their vows, they didn't look away. Life didn't turn gentle after that. Fences still broke, storms still came, but the weight was shared now. They walked the land together, side by side, fixing what needed fixing, leaving what could wait. One afternoon, Eli reached for a fence post and felt a familiar twinge in his side. Not pain this time, just memory. He smiled, slow and private. "No, don't," he said lightly. Mara glanced at him, amused. "What?" "That spot," he said, tapping his ribs. "Reminds me." She shook her head, smiling. "You're impossible." "Maybe," he said, "but I learned something." She waited. "Some hurts tell you to stop," he said. "Others teach you who to trust." Mara reached for his hand, squeezed once. The wind moved through the grass, the ranch breathing easy around them, held steady by two people who'd learned when to push through the pain, and when to hold on.